Hello, this is Dr. Laura Davis, and this is a short video on Margaret Atwood's book called The Testaments, and I'm going to talk today about chapter 60 all the way to the end of the novel. So we begin this chapter on chapter 60 with Aunt Lydia calling a meeting with Agnes, Becca, and Jade. And what's ultimately revealed at the meeting is that Agnes and Jade are sisters. Both will journey back to Canada, and Becca will remain in Gilead for now. This differs from the original plan that Lydia had when all three of them would go, but because there is an urgency with Judd becoming aware of some developments, she has to change her plan very quickly. So what we have now is a kind of a new plan, and this meeting is called, and the three of them are informed. So there's kind of some revelations in this sense. And then very quickly thereafter, that they are sent on their journey. So we kind of get launched into the journey at this point. The other thing that happens at this meeting that's of course very significant is that Lydia inserts a chip into Jade's tattoo. So we know the tattoo was a requirement a requirement that the so-called source, which we now know as Lydia, asked Elia and Ada and such to put into to do that tattoo for Jade. It kind of functioned as a sign that she was baby Nicole to Lydia and to the other, to the people who needed to know that, like the Pearl girls. They didn't know it was baby Nicole, but they knew they had to bring back somebody with a tattoo like that. So it functions as a kind of sign or a message. Messages and messengers are very important throughout the novel as a whole. So it serves as a message. But it also serves as kind of a carrier, right? Like her body actually becomes a carrier of this message, which is a really interesting kind of twist in a sense, because women in Gilead are carriers, but they themselves are devalued. The handmaids, for example, are carriers of children, but they themselves are less valuable. They are devalued. I think Margaret Atwood kind of twists this in having Jade as a carrier, but not as a carrier of a child and a carrier who, the body of whom can be disposed of, but instead as a carrier of a very important message. And as I said, right from the beginning of the novel, we've seen this idea of messengers and sending messages being kind of an important trope throughout. So the chip is put into her, and what does that chip contain? It contains documents which will lead to Gilead's downfall. So all of the things that have been top secret, the crimes, the ugliness, the power of Gilead is all going to be exposed through these documents, which are embedded in this chip in Jade's arm. So then she goes in it, and we find on this journey, there's a lot of challenges in this journey, including the fact that Jade's tattoo, where the chip was inserted, gets infected, and her arm feels detached from her body because it's become this big sort of balloon. So that's also interesting, in that she has to kind of carry this message as part of her body that becomes diseased, right? That part of her body becomes diseased. So another thing I will say here is that Agnes and Daisy are the angels who were also messengers. So remember back to that prayer that I talked about in the last video, the hymn, the lullaby, which talks about the angels to keep one's soul. I think in a sense Daisy and Agnes are messengers, but they're also angels here who are taking away, who are protecting all of the souls of Gilead, all the women and girls who they are now going to speak for and protect and release into freedom with this message that they're going to bring to Canada. So we see in this section as well that Jade uses her physical training and power to punch Aunt Vidala, and she kind of knocks her out in that sense, which has to be part of the plan, because Aunt Lydia knows that Vidala has a habit of going by her statue and leaving oranges and such, which in itself is quite interesting. There's been lots of talk throughout the novel about that being a kind of worshipping or idolatry, and all of the things surrounding that, which I won't get into right now. But one thing that's kind of interesting there is that after she punches her, she takes an orange and she actually ends up eating the orange. And I think that and that's talked about in the novel, and Daisy kind of says, I don't know if I should have eaten the orange or not, but I did, and Agnes didn't, and so Agnes is hungry. So she takes this orange, which has been put as a kind of symbol on Lydia's statue. I think that's kind of a reference to the forbidden fruit, the biting of the apple in the Garden of Eden. Now she's going to fall from innocence to experience, from innocence to knowledge. And we also might see this. So on the one hand, it's a forbidden fruit in the Garden of Eden that she eats. It leads to her fall from Eden, which is in a sense her liberation from Eden, right? In this sense, it's a twist again. It's a twist on it. It's not a fall, it's a liberation. It's an escape from. I think we can also see it as a biting of the poison apple, that kind of reference to Snow White, and the biting of the apple. So again, it's a biting into knowledge, into experience, and a fall from innocence. But I think Atwood is seeing that as in a good way, right? As in coming of age, coming into knowledge. We talked last time about the library and reading and writing as a coming into knowledge, and as empowerment. And I think this is a kind of symbol of that as well. We see that, she punches Aunt Videla, she takes her that's all that training that Garth taught her. She puts it into that one punch and takes the orange and is off. They go through a series of, adventures and challenges on their journey to escape Gilead. So they start out because they can't take a plane anymore because Judd has knowledge of what's going on. So they start out getting Aunt Lydia has arranged a driver. He drives them to a bus. The bus takes them further towards the north, towards the waters, which will take them eventually out of Gilead into Canada. And they embark on the Nellie J. Banks, the boat, which takes them out. And the Nellie J. Banks is a reference to a real schooner, a real boat. You can look that up. And it is kind of a historical reference, and it was a rum runner during Prohibition, right? So the Nellie J. Banks in the Testaments is also, the driver of that boat. He also kind of smuggles things across the same way the real historical Nellie J. Banks smuggled rum across and liquor across during Prohibition days. And the place names are real as well in that area. Atwood talks about the area of Maine and then moving up into Nova Scotia in Canada. So that was kind of a route for smuggling, and I believe even for the Underground Railroad back in the time of slavery. So I think Atwood is putting those real place names in for a reason and kind of, gesturing towards that history and so on. So I want to mention here a few key things with regard to the last few chapters of the novel. Okay, so for one, there's a balance struck between this idea of taking a leap of faith, the notion of faith and maintaining faith in something, and the idea of taking action and having an agency and power. So on the one hand, Atwood is putting forth your own energy and action on the one hand, and on the other hand, this kind of belief or faith. And both of those elements are there for Agnes and Jade. I would say that Agnes generally, she's the one that maybe represents or has the most comments that have to do with faith. She says at one point it's out of our hands. She's the one that points to the light, the moonlight shining on the water and giving a trail for them, like a path of light, which is a beautiful kind of metaphor for a spiritual path that's laid for them, like having the faith for that path. And on the other hand, Jade is the one when they're rowing, when the Nellie J. Banks can't take them any further and they have to go in the inflatable. She's the one that really pushes Agnes to keep rowing and taking that action. So as I said, there's a real balance between having faith and taking action, and I think Atwood is saying we need to strike that balance. We need to have both. Their journey in the flotation device. So after, when the Nellie J. Banks can't take them any further, they have to go in their kind of flotation device. They have to oar oar themselves in against the tide, and they almost don't make it, right? This is really the last bit of their journey, but the toughest part of their journey. But they do make it, and the imagery there, if you look at it, they're working against the tide. They've got the water like splashing over the entire boat just before they make it. And often in literature there is a scene like this where there is a kind of immersing into water and then a coming out of it. And often it refers to a kind of baptism or rebirth and kind of being born anew. And I think this is the scene in this text where that happens, that when they come out on the other side, they have moved from that innocent childhood life to that knowledge and that experience. They have become heroes in a way. They've become someone new. They have that behind them. And so that idea of being kind of reborn or baptized or coming out as someone with growth and spiritual knowledge behind them and experiential knowledge behind them, that's all implied through that journey through the sea there. So they also when they get to Canada, and this is really close to the end, right? They're